excited about hearing this young lady. First heard her at the Southern Cal Leadership Academy and this past winter. And I immediately said, oh my goodness, I hope she's available to come share with us up in Northern Cal. So this is Ms. Cheryl Lemke, and she is the CEO of the Metiri Group, a consulting firm that specializes in program evaluation, professional development, and systems thinking in digital learning and 21st century skills. Ms. Lemke is renowned for her expertise and experience in systems thinking from the policy level, with governors, legislators, superintendents, business leaders to the school and classroom, with administrators, teachers, students, and parents. She brings over 25 years of experience in public sector as a teacher, state technology director, policy expert at a national education laboratory, executive director at a foundation, and associate superintendent for the Illinois State Board of Education, where she led a division of 100 staff on data systems, infrastructure, and digital learning. She and her colleagues were the chief architects of the Future Ready Framework and the ISTE-Metiri professional organization. So without further ado, please welcome Ms. Lemke.
Thank you very much. I love that. I love the intro. I appreciate that. I have had the pleasure of working with School2Home for the past 3 years. It's been great, and I see so much progress in every one of the schools that are there. One of the things that we saw last year was this pivot that a lot of schools, well, every school had to go through. And we were, I as an evaluator was astounded that 100% of our School2Home partner schools said, if it wasn't for School2Home, we wouldn't have been where we were, that it was almost easy. No, they didn't, they said, well, in quotes, it was easy. But they thought that it was so much, they were so much better off than their colleagues down the street because they had School2Home. And I congratulate Sunny and Augustine and others for doing that. As an evaluator, we always look at the demographics. And so one of the things I'd like to share with you is that School2Home is actually really targeting the most disadvantaged middle schools in California. And you can just see some statistics up here about how the socioeconomically disadvantaged compare in School2Home versus statewide. I also wanted to share with you the lag in proficiency in math for School2Home middle schools and statewide, and also in ELA. So we've got a long way to go. Sunny mentioned and Augustine mentioned that that achievement gap as well as the digital divide is a really important one. And what I want to share with you first of all is the theory of action that is endemic in the School2Home model. This model was developed 10 years ago, and I congratulate Elaine Carpenter and Sunny and Augustine and others for what they've done, because it really has a logical flow to it. So, and let me just kind of explain that to you. First of all, you've heard a lot about the 10 core components. That is and we look at the implementation fidelity. That's one of our research questions. How well are the schools actually implementing the 10 core components? And that really addresses the, and begins to address the digital divide. Then from there, we say, well, if this foundation is in place, then the integration into classrooms and schools and the integration into homes with digital adoption and inclusion at homes can actually happen. But that foundation has to be there before we actually look at this. And one of the things we look at when we look at integration into classrooms and schools is actually, is it integrated into the other initiatives that are going on in the classrooms and the schools? So it shouldn't be a standalone. It really should be integrated into the core foundation of that school. And then finally, once we actually have some fidelity from this perspective, then and only then will we begin to see an impact on student outcomes and begin to close the achievement gap and actually have changes in policy and practice. Then then circle around. So so as we see these changes, there's going to be more and more changes in policy and practice. So you heard about the 10 core components, so I'm not going to repeat those. But what I would like you to do is to, let me put this into the chat. I'd like you to actually go into this polling mechanism, and it's actually going to be, whoops, it's going to be a rating system for you, where you actually go in and you can either go in and do menti.com on your phone and then put this code in, or you can use this URL. And I'm going to just pop this URL into the chat. Let me go find the chat. I guess I don't have the chat available. Would someone mind going in and actually putting that into the chat? Let me see if I can get back there.
Yes, I'll do that.
Okay, great. Good. And what I'd like you to do as it comes up, you'll be asked, and we're really interested. I know some of you are actually taking a look at School2Home. What we'd like you to do, now that you've heard a little bit about these core components, we'd like you to rate your school as it stands now on how much the school leadership is actually connected with that digital learning and remote learning. How are you doing on technology bundles? How are you doing on getting the right kinds of professional development for teachers? Do your teachers in your schools have coaching and mentoring? And we'd like you to just kind of rate that real quickly. It probably won't take you more than a couple minutes to actually use those slider bars on the Mentimeter and do that. So is that in the chat now?
Yes.
Great. I'm gonna pop over and actually take a look at it and on the presentation slide. I don't know if you guys have ever used Mentimeter before, but it's a really cool tool. It's free of charge and kind of the basic version. And you can literally see as people pop in that the scores change. Oh, there we go. And you can also see these peaks about where, how many people have weighed in and what the scores are for that. So it's a great tool if you haven't seen it. It's really very cool. And it's interesting that even with the few that we have in there, one of the things that we find is that the school leadership typically is actually the leading indicator. And this year, of course, the technology bundles absolutely are a leader as well, because we've had COVID, so many devices have gone out. Teacher professional development, coaching and mentoring, and student engagement as well. So that's kind of where you guys are right now. I'm going to go back to my slides, just one second, and let me go in and present. And what I'll do is I'll add actually the final result to this, but we asked you to rate it. We actually do an analysis and go as an evaluator and go in and look at how the schools are doing, who are the partners with School2Home. And what we find is that that the technology bundles this past year were really right at the top of the rating. It's a rating of 1 to 3. And because so many devices went out, we really saw that rating go sky high, where it was not as high in prior years. We also see that school leadership is actually going up because the principals and others and teacher leaders had to really step up this last year. And we see the professional development. This one is a tough one, not so much because people don't value it and don't know that it's really important, but that it's expensive. So there's some interesting ways that people are actually trying to get at coaching and mentoring. And finally, the parent engagement piece. So that's what that one looks like. And I was going to compare it, but I think I'll just go on. So how do we do this evaluation? Well, first of all, we have some primary sources of data. We typically do site visits, but of course, those were interrupted during the pandemic in March. And so we got 6 site visits out of the 27 in, and we do interviews, school walkthroughs, and classroom visits. We do surveys of students, parents, and teachers, and we do interviews of leadership teams. In addition, we do secondary sources of data where we look at your federal reports, we look at your climate surveys, we look at the California dashboard, the single plans for school improvement, and the LCAPs. And this year, there was actually a COVID-19 report that all of your districts had to do that we took a look at it. And out of all that data, we actually do provide each of the partners, the 27 schools, with individual reports, and then we also aggregate the reports as well. And I want to talk to you just a little bit about the aggregated reports. Our first research question, as I mentioned, is really looking at the fidelity of implementation of the 10 core components, and what kind of implication, what kind of impact did it have on that shift into distance learning. And what we found is that when we looked across our 27 partner schools last year, we found that they rated quite high. And when we looked at why, was some rated higher than others, we found the ones who were dedicated and energetic, that they had regular meetings. Some of them were challenged by staff turnovers. And so when you do that, these two are difficult, but many had high levels of implementation. And we found that this is the leading indicator. If we can get that school leadership team moving as a unit and sharing and interacting, the rest of the components actually follow. We also looked at technology bundles, and of course, this one is pretty high. All 27 partner schools achieved a 1-to-1 device to student ratio. We found that one of the things that was really critical in the success or lack thereof in distance learning is established practices and protocols for scaling up quickly. Whereas many of our partner schools had been working with a grade level or 2 grade levels prior, when they had to scale up to the entire school, it was quite easy for them because they had the checkout processes, the multiple drop-off sites and schedules, and the technical support system there. And we found now that nearly 95% of the students in these schools actually had a device at home. Moving on to teacher professional development, what we found is that oftentimes when we can get administrative support for teachers' professional development, we actually get a lot more teachers actively engaged. We also make sure that it's aligned with other initiatives. So if you're doing some training in math, why not incorporate how technology and devices can help you to really engage students further and get them active in analyzing data, et cetera. So integrate those things. It's really important. The challenges were time constraints and shifting priorities. And the School2Home offers some tremendous professional learning modules there. And I must tell you that this past year has been so impressive how the School2Home team has actually listened and learned about what teachers and what administrators needed during this pandemic, and they have stepped up. So the most valuable topics are personalized and student-centered learning, about the content standards, it's always about that, and the digital citizenship. Moving on, coaching and mentoring. As I said, this one's a tough one because people really recognize it's important, but resources are limited. We had some different kinds of models here. We had some that had instructional and technology coaching, oftentimes from the district level, and then they were put into the schools, or maybe they rotated among the schools. Some had release time for current teachers as a coach. And it was interesting, there's been some research recently that online coaching is just as effective as coaching inside the building. And I think that's an important thing for us to understand as we kind of move forward with this, and the resources continue to be limited. I also want to mention, and I heard this mentioned in some of the breakout sessions today, that the transition to distance learning really resulted in teachers beginning to co-teach in ways they haven't done before, and to share and exchange ideas and collaborate as we go. Parent engagement is a 2.1 out of 3. This one's always the toughest one, but the successes that our 27 schools have had are when they're committed and they have a dedicated parent lead, some person whose responsibility it is in the building to really make it happen, a supportive administrator, and multiple methods for recruiting parents, including getting teachers to actively engage parents and beginning to involve them in those parent modules. et cetera, et cetera. I won't belabor that one, but it is tough. One of the things we also do is we've done some crosstabs in terms of the data that we have, and we're finding that parents who participate in parent trainings are more likely than parents who did not, of course, to communicate with their child's teacher, to go online at least weekly to check for posted assignments, and to feel confident in conducting internet searches and using it at home, which is really important. So the kind of the summary of where the research question 1 is. Research question 2 is really about the integration into the classroom and school culture. So you've got all these 10 components and you've built this foundation, but the rubber meets the road when you look at what's going on in schools. And so we're really looking at, is there an integration into the fabric of the school so that digital learning is almost transparent, that it's really about learning, but technology is used in very effective ways. And teachers are actually learning from research what works and what doesn't work. So if collaboration is actually a really effective strategy, how can we help make that more effective with technology? If visualization is more, the research says that that's really helping to help kids to learn math problem solving, then how can technology help us do that? So it's really got that integration here. One of the things I'd like you to do is, again, we've got another Mentimeter, and what I'd like you to do is to go into this one, and if somebody would put that in the chat, I'd appreciate it. But go in, and my question to you in this one is asking you to share an opportunity that the transition to distance learning opened for you, your students, and your school. Because many times people were saying, gee, there's a silver lining to this, that it's, although it's hard, it's really opened an opportunity for me to do things in ways that I wouldn't have thought about before. And so if you jump in there and just share just 1 or 2 things, and then we'll jump over there and take a look at what you're sharing. I'm gonna just let you do that for just a moment.
A lot of people.
We have a couple that are coming in, teaching students how to fix Chromebooks. That's great. All that tech team, increase communication and connections with parents. Finally got to one-to-one, which is fabulous. I know a lot of us have been hungry for that for a long time. When our leadership purchased new Chromebooks, yeah, you got it. I got to learn how to use the computer and tech webs. That's great. And I think there's a lot of things that people are beginning to see are possible. One of the questions we're asking this year of our in our survey is, what are you doing through distance learning that's new to you that you're now going to take back to the classroom, even when you go into in-person time? Here's another one on creating hybrid models, part online and part in person, even when you go back into the classroom. Reflecting on and digging into the idea of learner engagement. That's so important. A lot of teachers reflected on this one and said, I had no idea that my kids really weren't engaged, and it became very apparent as I got into distance learning. So how do I do that? Great. Well, thank you for sharing. And again, I'll capture all of this and put it into the slides if you want to come back and look at it a little bit later. Okay. The research question 2, again, is that integration into classroom and school culture. And typically what we do is we actually do site visits to take a look at that. We were not able to do that this year, but we did have data from a very small sample size from 6, and we found engagement levels were mid to high, that there were moderate uses of technology in depth of knowledge and critical thinking in real world applications and in the range of uses. We also found that during the transition to distance learning that there were substantial increases in access. And I think we've talked enough about that one, that there were new opportunities, as you mentioned in the chat, in the Mentimeter that we just did, and that there were some challenges. One was maintaining pre-pandemic enrollment areas. And I think all of us are well aware that that's been a challenge, that we have kids who are disappearing. So how do we get back, we get them back, facilitating low cost internet subscriptions and so on. So there's lots of challenges there, as we've seen. And one of the other things, and I think I mentioned that 100% of the partner schools said that School2Home actually eased this transition. And why was that? Well, teachers were already using blended and digital learning, and it was a transition just to up the ante and really make that happen. There were many communications with parents that had already begun. And so the process was in place and it just scaled up. And teachers, students were already familiar with a lot of the digital apps and digital tools. One of the things, though, that we found that teachers were saying is that they did not realize how many of their students were not self-directed, or they didn't realize that some students were self-directed and they hadn't ever kind of seen that before. And so that's another area that, that we're actually taking a look at. The other thing that teachers told us is that this distance learning piece gave some real opportunity to rethink teaching and learning and technology. And I think that is really a powerful thing, that teachers had time to step back and say, you know, that social emotionally learning is so important because I need to know my kids, and my kids need to know that I trust them and respect them, and I really am engaged in what they're doing. So we saw a lot of reflection by them. And as you can see, teams said they wanted to use more engaging learning techniques, that they wanted to focus on that trust and sound leadership. And we had open-ended questions that came in, and it was from teachers, and they talked a lot about the specific digital applications that we could share with you. They talked about using digital lessons and digital tools, etc. So they really had time to think about it. We also asked an open-ended question of students, and what we found, and by the way, would someone put this Padlet URL into the chat as well? One of the things that we asked the students was, what would make learning from home better for you? And we had over 1,300 students who actually responded to us, and a lot of them said, change the instruction, make it clearer, make it more engaging, make it more interesting, archive it so I can go back and look at it, and so on. So what I'd like you to do with this Padlet is I'd like you to jump over there, choose one that you think is actually a challenge in your school, and share, just click on these plus signs and just share one strategy that you're going to use or you have used this year to address some of the issues that our students came up with. Okay, so I'm going to be quiet for just a second and let you jump over to that Padlet, and then I'll actually jump over there live as well, and we'll see the kinds of things that you're coming up with. And is that in the chat? Thank you.
Yes.
I'm going to jump over there. Oh, we got a lot more on this one as well. And this one, let me just read some of these to you. Provide more teacher support, tutoring, and help. Your group is saying more small groups. We had time to have more specific tutoring time, absolutely. With changing the instruction, post-student version of the class slides on LMS, on the learning management system. So if they've missed it, they can go back to it. Kids in breakout rooms for increasing the interaction and collaboration. Absolutely. So, and it's interesting, a lot of teachers have come up with ways to solve these issues that our students have come up with. But I must tell you, I was so impressed with the genuine concern that a lot of students expressed about some of these issues and how they really wanted to learn, and they wanted these things to get better. as you're going. And again, I will post all of these in the URL, and you all have the URL as well and can come back and look at them. So really, this one, I thought this was interesting. Engagement activities, puzzles, and pictures. That whole multimedia approach is really important, and we can mix it up and make it a lot more interesting and relevant to kids as we go. So student voice and choice, 30 minutes of instruction followed by 30 minutes of work. So you're there helping them. Fantastic. That's great. Let me go back. I've got limited time, so I'm going to kind of move right along here. How am I doing on time? So I think I'm still within my 30 minutes. So the third research question we have is the effect on digital adoption and inclusion at home. And this one, I think, is kind of the signature piece for School to Home. There's very few programs out there that actually actually recognize the power of what parents and students together can do when they become a part of a learning team. And so one of the things we found is that the effect that School to Home had in our 27 schools was increased home access. There was an increase in digital citizenship in the sense that parents were able to learn how to model that and how to monitor that with their students, and that they actually very intentionally discuss safety with the student, and the fact that it also kind of extended the home so that parents actually could do a lot on web resources. And there were a significant number of parents who actually used the device that was actually checked out to the home. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but increase in school to home communication, absolutely. And that's both in the apps and also in the frequency of checking in. And then the fourth one is impact on student outcomes, where we typically actually look and track progress in ELA and math. And we couldn't do that this year, of course, because there were no end of year tests. But we did actually get some perceptions. And what we found is, no surprise, parents were concerned, and that student perceptions were that 17% said they were learning more at home, 50% said about the same, and 33% said a little bit less. And I wonder if that hasn't changed this year as teachers have become more proficient and competent in providing distance learning. And then the last research question is about the influence on changes in policy and practice. And we actually do an analysis of the LCAP of each one of the districts that are involved. And we find that there's varying mentions of the technology for learning perspectives and for data analysis. What we found this year was that because of COVID, districts had to write a COVID-19 report, and it was pretty amazing. They actually did a lot of writing about how they were going to be using technology, especially to support subgroups such as homeless, et cetera, and in ways that we had not seen in the LCAP before. So I think this year has really pushed them to see the power of the technology across that system. And we're hoping that there'll be an increase in where the mentions are in the LCAP in the future. And finally, we have some recommendations. We think that School to Home should be supported as a statewide model. It has worked so well for the schools that they're in. They should continue the capacity building that they're doing, working with partner schools. Change takes time, and it really does, with all the other things that are going on. It really needs to continue in a series of years. That there needs to be something done about affordable internet, and Sunny has done such an incredible job of advocating for that in California. We hope that she continues, but that all of us join in. And we heard earlier that certainly is happening. That perhaps the expansion of the School to Home network, and I think this event is part of that. And then finally, improving implementation and integration as always. So with that. The theory of action, I think, is really important. It's logical and makes a lot of sense. And here's my email if you have any questions. So back to you. Thank you. Bye.
All right, thank you so much. I know we're running very close to the end. Just one more person, but thank you so much, Cheryl, for joining us. And again, I will be sharing out the link, and I think she also put it in the chat for us, but I'll follow up with everybody with the direct links. And of course, kind of like I mentioned, if you have any questions, please let me know.